Hello retro fans, welcome to another episode on C64 Customs, and today we are talking about something that's not related to the C64. I hope you're not going to fly away right now, but well, it contains a 6502 CPU, so therefore it's very close kind of to the C64. And you may guess it already, since it was kind of well revealed by the title. It's going to be about the NES, and especially the NES RGB mod. And you may have seen this on this channel already, because the installation of the RGB mod was done during about 3 live sessions. So we spent quite some hours together in the chat and going through all that steps required to get this mod into the NES. And today I'm going to show you, let's say, a condensed version. So I picked let's say, the most important parts out of the live streams and created some sort of a time lapse. So we do not have to spend about 5 to 6 hours as this takes to install this mod today. So I have shortened this a bit, and therefore we are going through this in about half an hour, something like this. And afterwards I'm going to explain a couple of things I haven't covered in, let's say, in this time-lapse video. And because on the one side I have done those things later, and between the installation of the RGB mod and right now, a certain amount of time has passed, and I had some learnings, I had some experience with this mod, and this is what we are going to talk about today. So let's jump right into the topic. And just as a small reminder, if you have not yet done so, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. This really helps this whole thing to grow. And that's basically what keeps that whole thing alive. And therefore, it is really important. And then let's start. So, and as I said, let's start again, start right now with the video, so that we are not going to waste that much time chatting about something you can't see. And here we go. As the very first step, I had to check whether my replacement PBU, which I have ordered over eBay, is working. So that's not an original part from Nintendo, that's some kind of replica, something like this. And I'm sorry, just curious to see whether it makes sense to work with a replacement PBU. You may have recognized that getting an original PBU is kind of hard, and even if you have the chance to get one, then it's a bit expensive. And therefore I was really looking forward to testing this one. And especially if you work on modifications like this, it's really important to prove certain steps, so that you're not going to run through this whole project and at the end you just recognize something isn't working and you have no idea what it is. So this was basically the very first test, seeing if this replacement PBU is working. And as you can see, this PBU socket is already on the NES, so that's one step that is really required to install this RGB mod. And I have done this before, because this is quite a long story how I came to the NES at all, so you may rewind some videos on my channel and then you can see this. And one first step to get this RGB board onto the NES is basically getting those socket connectors attached to the board, and especially to check if you have enough clearance. You may know that the NES board is mounted upside down in the NES case itself. So all those ICs are kind of on the bottom of this PCB. And here I run into the problem that I have put this CIC EIC on a socket, So that's basically the region protection IC. And there's a simple modification. If you just kind of disconnect leg 4 of this IC, then the NES is going to be able to run games from foreign regions as well. But as you can see, those 2 red wires on the back, that's a second version how to perform a region-free mod, and therefore it's not really longer required to use this leg 4 method. And as you can see, I'm having quite a hard time getting the socket off of the board again. And that's one of the major issues you may face if you work on an NES. Those ICs, and in this case the socket, is really hard to remove compared to a C64 where it's some kind of walk in the park, let's say. But on the NES it requires quite often that you have a soldering iron on one side and a desoldering gun on the other side to heat the pins to a really working temperature. And as I had done this removal, then I was soldering back the CIC chip and put this NES in kind of a, let's say, factory status, except for the 2 red wires. And this was basically required to have the clearance, which is basically a kind of well, a major part of this modification. So, and as usual, I was going to check whether the NES is still working even after this little operation. And now it's about time to get those IC connectors soldered to the RGB board itself. And here you really have to pay attention that everything is aligned in a, let's say, kind of parallel way, so that this RGB mod is not kind of pointing into one direction. It has really to be kind of integrated into this whole system. Since on the bottom of the NES there isn't that much space in the case, and you really have to be careful that this is basically, well, fitting well into the NES. So now it's about time to solder all those IC connector pins to the board, which isn't a very complicated part. And what you can see here as well, there is a little kind of daughter board attached to this whole thing, and those additional 3 wires are originally not a part of this modification. And this is some sort of a special version of this RGB mod, and this is some kind of, let's say, remote controlled color palette switch and a remote controlled reset function. I'm going to demonstrate this after this time-lapse video, how this is going to be working and what's going to be the effect of this whole modification. And although this is quite a nice feature of this, let's say, special version, it's probably not really something you need to have. So it is just kind of raising the costs for this whole modification, and it requires a few more steps of installation, and therefore it is really something you have to consider if it is something you need or not. So usually I would tend to put a socket on the board to have the PPU on a socket to make it kind of replaceable. But as I said, space is a very precious thing in this whole modification, and therefore you have to solder the PPU to the board. Otherwise it wouldn't fit into the NES case without modification of the NES case. And as you may know, I'm not a big fan of modifying retro cases, since, well, they are limited in numbers, and every case you kind of change, it's a case you cannot revert to the original stage. Unfortunately, we are going to see this at a later step in this video. You have to have some drilling to this case anyway, so perhaps it could be an idea to change the case that you can use a socket PPU. But on the other side, my experience at least is that those parts are really reliable, and there's probably not going to be a need to replace the PBU at all. So that's a thing that's different to the C64, where those parts become quite hot, and you may have to replace the VIC2 at a certain point of time. Now I was just soldering two soldering pads on this RGB mod to tell the RGB mod that we are going to work in a PEL system. So you can use this RGB mod to run it as NTSC as well, but then you have to change the PBU as well and the configuration of the RGB mod. And here I had a moment of confusion because the installation manual I have received was showing a different voltage controller. So the RGB mod is requiring a certain amount of juice, and to force this amount of power over the original voltage controller isn't really recommended. And therefore, one way is to add one additional voltage controller in parallel to the original one. And the issue I was facing is that the manual was showing a different voltage controller. So I had to Google the part I have received to find how I have to kind of, let's say, implement this whole thing, just to learn afterwards that a one-to-one replacement of the original voltage regulator was doing the trick, and this modification was some kind of well, a learning experience and not really required for the whole project. But anyway, I was quite happy that I was able to figure out how to install this in parallel, and the picture you can see here right now is part of the installation manual. And this was a little bit tricky since the, let's say, the document was telling a different story than the pictures, and I had to come up with a kind of mix. And here I'm moving forward to the RGB cable, so it's going to be a SCART cable. And as you can see, the cable itself is almost bigger than the plug, and that's one major thing I really recommend, that using mini DIN sockets is probably not the best option for this one. I highly recommend going for either real size DIN sockets or some different format of a plug and connector, since a SCART cable has usually quite of a rigidity, so it's really stiff, so to say. And therefore adding this to those small plugs and small sockets is not really something that is going to work reliable for a long time. I mean, in some sort of controlled environment it may work, but if you just consider putting this into your living room, and you may have your kids playing with the NES and then they just kind of move it around or something like this, then this is very likely to break. And the next thing, which we are going to see here quite soon, is soldering those socket and the plug is a major pain in the AP, so that's really not enjoyable at all. But let's move on to what I'm doing here right now. Basically, SCART is some sort of a container, so that's just a physical format, but the way you're going to use this is basically kind of predefined in certain ways, but not every SCART cable is going to be the very same. And there are different options how a SCART cable is configured. And you may have, let's say, a video recorder SCART cable, which is bidirectional. And especially in this case, the RGB cable is just a unidirectional, so it's just sending signals in one direction. And therefore you have a different pin layout. And what I'm doing here right now is using basically this original cable and modifying to a layout that's working with this RGB mod. So, and this is quite close to the end of the first live stream, and here I was really interested in to see whether the whole modification is working so far. And therefore I was just preparing the cable in a, let's say, quick and dirty way. And as you're going to recognize, I just soldered the whole cable to the RGB board, to the RGB mod, and just to give it a test whether this is going to work at this point of time. So this is basically something I do not recommend for people who are not working in, let's say, kind of a lab environment. So I mean, I got an ESD mat on my table, and basically the whole environment is kind of designed to work on those projects. But if you do this every now and then, and if this is not your, let's say, main profession, then I do not recommend soldering cables directly to boards like this. But for the time being, I think it was indeed a very interesting option just to see if the system is working. And as you may have recognized, I paid some attention that I do not have some loose parts, wires cut, something like this on the table. And this is basically the very first time I have switched this whole system on. Now I'm just looking for the audio cable, and then hopefully we are going to see a picture. No, that's not the audio cable. I'm sorry, that's the power cable. And my issue was that the power cable was too short, and I had to do some reconfiguration of my, let's say, cable installation to get the NES attached to the power system. And as you can see, it is working, well, kind of out of the box. So that was really a very interesting experience. And at this step, I was just adding a controller just to go through the list of games. As you can see, I'm using this 143 games in one cartridge, which makes it quite easy to test things. And now it's about time to add audio to the system as well, since I haven't soldered inside the NES and I was using the original output. So, and as you may see, the picture quality is really outstanding. It looks absolutely fantastic, and there is some small amount of shivering still left in the picture, but this is not related to the RGB mod. This was related to my, let's say, cabling, since the power supply for the NES and the power supply of the OSSC were connected to different sockets. I have different circuits here on my desk, and this has created some sort of shivering. And as I was switching all that PSUs to one socket, then this shivering was done. So this is the before mentioned drilling activity of the NES case. So you have to find a place to install the sockets at some position. And I was using, let's say, a special drill tool to get some very even holes, and I was paying a lot of attention that they get aligned in a certain way and all that stuff. But well, as we are going to see quite in a minute, the position wasn't really wise, since soldering the sockets inside the NES case isn't really a big pleasure, and the design of those mini DIN sockets is in a way that you have to put them into the case first, and then you can solder them from the back, which makes it really cumbersome to work with. So, and as you can see, there's some sort of mini PCB which is attached to the back of the mini DIN socket, and this creates some sort, let's say, of comfort. It's perhaps easier than soldering the wires directly to the socket, especially in this awkward position I have chosen here. And therefore it is well up to you whether you're going to solder the PCB to the socket and then solder the wires, as I did this for the first socket, or you do it the other way around. You solder the socket, you solder the wires to the PCB and then you solder the PCB to the socket, which I have done for the S-Video socket, which is the socket in the middle. But this isn't shown in this video since I have done this quite later. So I have used simply some hot glue to keep the socket in place. And this is another argument of not placing them in the bottom left-hand corner, since you can't reach them with your hot glue gun very comfortable. And here I was just adding the audio to, let's say, the original modulator, but later I switched to the audio that's provided by the RGB mod. So there is an option to feed the audio coming from the CPU into this RGB board and get the audio from the board directly. And this is something I have added later, since at this moment in time I wasn't aware of this option, and therefore I was doing the, let's say, more logical way to get the audio from the modulator. So I'm just trying to keep the cable in place, since I don't want to get this kind of ripped off in the whole project. And I'm using a lot of heat shrink insulation material, and that's very, very comfortable to work with. And now it's about time to get this soldered to the socket. So, and as you can see, I was struggling a little bit with the positioning of the case. I had either the problem that I wasn't seeing something, or it was dark, or it wasn't visible in the camera. So, and actually I kind of gave up at the end, and I decided I'm not going to show this in that much detail than I was looking forward to. But I mean, soldering some points isn't really complicated, and therefore, well, you may guess how this is going to be done. But you can see it's a very tight place, and you really have to pay attention that you're not going to melt something with your soldering iron. And therefore I really recommend choosing a different position for those sockets. So, and this is basically kind of a bridge between the audio socket and the SCART socket. So my intention was to have the audio feed over the SCART cable as well, which is basically not the plan of this mod, and therefore I was checking this kind of mini PCB, which pin is connected to which part of the connector, in order to see whether there is basically enough wires left to feed the audio, so that I avoid to have a SCART cable plus an additional audio cable. But if you like to do so, or if you want to use this modification to run the NES as an YC/S video connected device, then you're going to need the audio socket, and therefore I was interested in to get this done in one step. And here you can see, here I'm trying to solder those little wires to this mini PCB in this very uncomfortable position. So that's basically not very enjoyable. So, but well, I got it done at a certain point, and really took a couple of attempts to get all those little wires aligned. And I really had to pay attention that I'm not going to mix them up, otherwise you will end up having strange colors or no picture at all if you solder sync to the wrong pin or something like this. And then I did a quick checkup with my multimeter to see if I had no shortcuts or something like this in between the wires and the pins. And just to keep the wire in place, I used some hot glue to kind of, let's say, protect it mechanically. So, and now it was about time to move on to the plug. And as mentioned already, the plug is almost smaller than the cable itself, so I had to modify the plug a little bit to get the cable fit into it. And what's really important is that you have to pay attention to the length of those wires, since there's basically no space for any, let's say, reserve or something like this inside the plug. You really have to come up with the correct dimension. And yeah, I'm just going to prepare the audio part as well, and to have one common ground. So basically a SCART cable could contain a couple of different ground connections, but that's basically not required for this mod, and that's basically not recommended at all. Otherwise you may end up having some humming noise or something like this in your audio. And since audio and video is coming from a common ground out of the NES anyway, it makes no sense, and therefore I was just reducing this to one common connection. And here I'm checking whether this will fit into the plug, just to recognize that it is still a bit too long, and therefore I had to shorten this a bit and had to prepare all those little wires once again. And this is really something that eats up a lot of time. And if you like to tinker around with things like C64, something like this, then you may have the same problem like I have. I really hate doing connector soldering, something like this. And since this plug is so small, you have to work pretty fast. Otherwise, you're going to melt this whole plug, and then it's going to lose some lose shape and alignment, and you won't be able to get this into the socket at later time. So I was really paying a lot of attention that all those wires are prepared perfectly, so that I just had to heat up the pin quite quickly and add the wire to it and let it cool down. There is kind of a, well, let's say, trick. You can put this plug into a potato, for example, and this potato is going to absorb the heat, and this may protect your plug a little bit, but this may make soldering a little bit harder as well, because I mean you're cooling the pin on the other side as well, obviously. But well, finally I got through this, and here you can see I did some cleaning of my desk, and now it's about time to check whether the cable is working. And this cable is basically not part of the mod, so if you got this as an assembly kit, then you have to take care about this by yourself. Here I'm just checking the connections, whether I got all the pins right and whether I got any shortcuts or something like this inside of the cable. And fortunately everything was working fine. And now it was about the time to test this once again. I was struggling to connect the connector, the gamepad connector. And well, the OSSC needs some power as well. I was kind of surprised, but this was related to my change to a different socket, and as you can see here it was even worse. So I got the wrong socket, and then I really had to change this later in the progress of this RGB mod. So here I'm just checking Wise, which is a very nice game.
So everything is working fine.
And we have some original
pleased.
voice here as well. So that's fantastic. I'm just going to put the plug together, and then that's all I want to do for this day. I'm so happy that this is working out of the box. I have replaced this connector, this cartridge connector as well, and it's working very fine even in the up position. And yeah, that's all I want to do for today. And I'm very happy that everything has worked. So, thank you very much for watching, thank you very much for joining. Whew, that's a big relief, I really have to admit. That was not the work I'm very comfort with, but well, it needs to be done. And yeah, thank you very much for your support, and see you for the next video. So, and we are not done yet, so please stay and follow the process. And what I have mentioned at the beginning is that this special version of this RGB mod has some kind of remote controlled palette switch, color palette switch, and a remote controlled reset function. And what I'm actually doing here is connecting this little daughter board to the NES board. This requires basically 3 different connections. One is going to the communication IC of port 1, and the other pins are going to be connected to 2 pins of the CPU. There are some solder points on the NES you can use, but especially on the communication IC, you have to go for the pin of the IC directly. So this requires some, well, careful soldering, and I wasn't able to perform this modification in an earlier stage because I was missing the information, and the pictures attached to the email I had received was showing 3 wires with the very same color, so I had no idea which pin has to be connected to what part of the NES. So I got this later as some, let's say, clarification instruction, something like this. And the original modification is coming from Edom. I'm going to put this in the description section as usual, but he's not describing how to install this remote controlled option, and therefore I was relying on, let's say, the distributor of this special version. And as I have mentioned, this came as an assembly kit. It has included all the parts required to put this into an NES. So you got the socket, you got the IC connectors, you got the mini DIN connectors, and all that plugs you require for this one. And as I said, it's really something you have to consider if you're interested in to have this RGB mod. Then I would say go for the original board from Australia. It's going to be cheaper, and if you're not really looking forward to, or if you're not really in need of this remote control things, we're going to talk about this in a minute, then you can really save a lot of money. I mean, this additional option costs you about 20 euros, $20, something like this. And as you can see, it is required to make a modification to this main connector. So you have to bend one pin out of the PCB, and you have to connect this reset connection from the daughter board to this pin. And therefore you really have to perform some more steps. And this color palette switch is working, let's say, mechanically as well. So you can attach a normal 3-position switch to your RGB mod, or this little PCB, and you can switch between the palettes. And my experience is that switching between color palettes in the middle of a game or something like this is very unlikely. So basically you're going to pick one that fits your needs, and then you may stick to it anyway. Or in case you're going to change, let's say, the games you're going to play quite often. So if you may play Castlevania or Batman, which are pretty darkish games, then you may want to have a different palette than if you play Super Mario Bros. Or something like this, which is kind of bright. But usually I tend to stick to one palette that fits my needs, and then therefore it's not really so important to have this functionality. And therefore you really have to know whether this is worth the money you have to spend in addition. So now I had to solder back this main connector, and I had to be a little bit careful that I solder back my region mod, and that's basically required for the reset. And in order to show you, or in order to provide some feedback what palette you have selected, this mod supports a 2-color LED, or basically it can mix colors, so it has basically more colors, but you may guess what I want to say. And usually you have to change this bluish main connector as well, since this main reset switch or power switch little board is not running on GND, it's running on 5V. But for this 2-color LED mod we require GND, and I was a little bit, let's say, lazy doing this, so, and therefore I was just using 3 wires going to the LED directly, and this well, saved me some time modifying the main connector again. So, and now it's time to check whether all those stuff fits back into the case. as you can see, we have added quite an amount of additional wires, and therefore I really had to, well, play some cable Tetris to get everything fit into the case. And here I was struggling a little bit because the audio cable was kind of making some troubles, and it was a little bit hard to figure out what's going to be the solution for this kind of shaky board. And as I said, I have changed the audio connection afterwards anyway, so that's probably something I recommend at all, doing this in a way that you use this RGB board to, well, create your audio signal. And that's basically the end of this time-lapse video of this main installation of this board. And well, we are not done yet, because I got this NES on my desk, and we're going to talk about a little bit the NES itself. We will have a look inside what I have changed in addition to this. And as you can see, it still is in this kind of beaten up case, which was missing the lid at all. So I have installed my 3D printed lid to this case, and well, it looks quite nice-ish. I just have to, well, spend some time with this other parts. So, and well, this is basically what we have seen in the video as well. What I have changed so far is basically I added this S-Video connection as well, so you can run this NES mod on an S-Video /YC device as well, whether it's going to be a TV or a capture card or something like this. And this makes it kind of, well, let's say, versatile to use. And I'm going to show you what I have changed in addition to this on the inside. And for this we have to get this board out of the case. And this is a little bit tricky because these cables are not so long. So let's remove them quite quickly so that we can turn this around. So, as you can see, it is indeed a bit busy now, since I have added the audio to this one. And the audio you can get from those two resistors, R4 and R3. They are linked directly to the CPU, so you have to pay some attention. And then they're going to feed into this RGB board. And here I get the audio from here, and have connected this to the audio connector in the back and to the SCART connector here as well. And basically that's the connection of the LED, which we have seen in the video. And this is basically the wiring for the remote controlled palette switch reset stuff and the reset function. So much about the changes I have added in a later stage. I think, yeah, I've mentioned all of them. Now let's put this back into the case, paying some attention to the cables and connecting all that stuff back to the system, and having a look at this so-called palette switch. So can leave it like it is, and we move on to different view. Power. Okay, we may have to plug in some power first. And we're going to need a controller, I guess. And now we are back in business. So, as usual, original NES controllers coming with a lot of cable, or a long cable anyway. And now let's jump into, let's say, a game where we can see the effect of the palette switch. Now let's skip the intro a bit. Now we are in the game, and as you can see, now we have some sort of kind of brown greenish palette. And by holding down select and start and using the cross, we can switch between palettes. Now we have a more colorful palette, and now we have a kind of a grayish, darkish, brownish palette. And the LED, that's a little bit hard to see here right now, is going to change the color in order what kind of palette you have used. Actually, I've forgotten which one is basically the original palette. I think it's this one. And as I said, you can select the palette you like in, well, accordance to the game you want to play. And this is indeed a nice feature, well, but as I said, I'm not using that so often that I really say that this is required to have it as a remote option. And the second thing you can do here right now, you can hold down select and start and press A and B, and this is going to, well, perform a reset. Usually it should, so yeah. And this brings you back to, let's say, the boot menu if you have a multi-game in one card, or if you want to reset your game, then you can use this function as well. This may make some sense if you have this NES somewhere in your TV shelf or something like this, and it's kind of out of reach. But I mean, for me personally, where this NES usually spends most of the time in front of me on my desk when I'm going to use this, I can simply press the reset button by myself. So that's not really the feature that's going to be the most used, I have to say. And as you have seen, it is a little bit awkward to press 4 buttons on this small NES controller at once. But, well, just as a little addition to this whole modification. So, to kind of summarize this, is it worth the effort? Is it worth the money? I have to say, picture quality wise, absolutely yes. The picture quality is simply, it's outstanding, it's breathtaking. So if you know the original output of an NES, you know that's not one of the best consoles in terms of picture quality. And if you compare this to, let's say, this RGB modification, then it's really absolutely fantastic. I tend to say it's almost emulator-like what you get as a video output, and therefore it's up to you whether you like it or not. I mean, if we consider the price tag for this whole thingy, we talk about 120 euros for this remote controlled option and about 100 euros for the standard option. And you have to add about, let's say, 5 to 6 hours, including building the cable, to install this. So this is indeed a lot of money. It's indeed a lot of effort. And if you consider that you get a NES Mini, for example, for, let's say, about half of the price, with a lot of games included already, then that's really something you have to consider. I mean, I'm a huge fan of original hardware in a modified way. So I have to add this and kind of quote to quote or something like this. So I really kind of dislike emulators, which is partly true, I have to admit. I mean, got a C64 Mini, I got a Neo Geo Mini, and I got this Famicom handheld. They are all emulators, but basically I really like the original stuff, and I really want to squeeze as much quality out of these devices as possible. And therefore, for me, it's absolute something I wanted to have, and I'm really happy with it. But as I said, that's really up to you whether you're going to need this. And my recommendation is, if you're just looking for an improvement of your video output, then see whether you can get this from Australia directly. Then you're going to pay, I think, including shipment worldwide, about 90 euros or something like this, $90. So that's basically way more interesting than getting this assembly kit that isn't working very well from Germany. I will put the link in the description section. Anyway, you can have a look, you can decide by yourself. But as I said, those mini DIN connections are not really something I recommend for the system. The next modification I'm going to do on an NES or on a Famicom or something like this, I will definitely go for different connectors. So anyway, that's all about the NES RGB mod, and I have to say a big thank you to all the people who have joined the live stream. It was a very pleasant experience, and it was really supportive to hold my motivation over these hours of soldering, especially of the cable, for example. And as usual, a very big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, on Ko-Fi, and to all of my channel members here on YouTube. Highly appreciate your help. And if you have not considered yet, then feel free to pick one of the options to support me to make more modifications like this. And if you have not yet done so, then feel free to subscribe or to follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. This really helps to grow this whole thing. This really keeps me motivated to work on things like this, and I really appreciate this. So that's basically the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, comments, whatever, feel free to use the comment section. Feel free to discuss this on Twitter. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts about this, and then as usual, see you for the next episode. Bye bye.